Hello, everyone. Today, we will step into the world of people who have spent their entire lives closely connected to the harshness of nature, where the cold is not just a feeling, but also a daily challenge. Imagine the mountain people, the hunters, the wanderers in the deep forests of icy North America. They survived long before any heating systems or modern conveniences existed. In this video, I will guide you through survival secrets, untold stories, and lessons that we seem to have forgotten about the cold. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to join me until the end of the video. And please share in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is now. It's amazing to see people from all over the world joining this journey. Mountain people did not live to become heroes. They lived for simple and ruthless reasons: survival. They were men who saw the edge of the map and thought, let's see what happens if I go further. Not out of bravery, but because there was no other choice. Most were failed farmers, forgotten veterans, or simply people no one else could tolerate. Civilization was noisy, cramped, and judgmental. So they packed up their dubious lives, shouldered unnecessary risks, and stepped straight into winter. A bone-chilling winter where both will and body were tested to the extreme. In the early 1800s, mountain people were drawn to the fur trade and the promise of wealth. But wealth here was not gold or luxurious comforts. It was simply not starving amid waist-deep snow while chasing beavers. Their work was uncomplicated but extreme. 6 months in the mountains, enduring skin-cutting cold and bringing back something worth selling. Otherwise, they would not survive to tell the tale. Average life expectancy was close to the campfire, a fragile border between life and death. No hotels, no thermoses, no weather reports, just them, their rifles, and the sense that every decision could be a deadly mistake. The cold is a strict teacher. It neither hates you nor befriends you. It simply exists, unchanging and unforgiving. Mountain people learn to face the cold not with strength or strategy, but with respect and caution. They built fires with wet, cold wood, huddled like shivering philosophers by the flames, praying the wind wouldn't blow across. A small gust could extinguish the fire, steal precious warmth, and remind them that nature does not care about human existence. In the darkness, amid the white snow, warmth was currency. A glowing ember, a spark, or a fire surviving a blizzard, all were miracles, a chance to live one more hour. Food for them was not a pleasure, but a means of survival. They ate old meat, bone marrow, and things city dwellers would turn away from. Every calorie consumed was a victory against the cold, and every meal a lesson in adaptability. They understood that pain is temporary, but stupidity is deadly. The cold does not forgive poor planning. When your beard freezes, coffee turns to ice before you can drink it. It is all a harsh reminder that nature shows no mercy. They learned to listen to nature, a skill no app could teach. The change in wind direction, the sound of snow underfoot, the silence of the forest, or how flocks of birds and packs of wolves reacted to a blizzard, all were valuable information about what was coming. Mountain people did not call it intuition, it was attention. They survived not because they were stronger, but because they were aware. Nature is generous to those who respect it, ruthless to all others. You cannot learn this skill through podcasts or books. Only by enduring winter, eating frozen jerky, and seeing snow cover everything can you learn to speak the language of white silence. The cold is not merely a physical challenge, it is a teacher, a lawyer, a judge. It reminds mountain people that they are mere small entities in a vast universe. When night falls and snow piles heavily, they become shivering philosophers, learning to evaluate every decision by survival. Fingers, ears, nose, all have limits. They do not complain, they adapt. They know that pain is temporary, but stupidity can kill. The cold teaches patience, attention, and respect. Mountain people do not seek comfort, they create survival. Every time they build a fire, they learn to balance risk and safety, hope and reality. Every fire burning amid the white snow is a symbol of the small power humans can create against nature. They do not beg for warmth, they build it from the simplest materials: frozen wood, flint, skill, and a bit of luck. All are lessons in efficiency and decisiveness. The cold is neither angry nor kind. It simply exists, testing every plan, exposing every mistake. Mountain people understand that if you do not adapt, you become part of the landscape. not existing in the story, but only forming the background for others' survival tales. The white silence of the mountains is not peace, but a warning. They learn to read it, interpret signs modern people ignore, and turn that attention into life. And finally, what sets them apart from us is not physical strength or courage, but the way they respect and cooperate with nature. They do not fight the cold, they learn to negotiate with it. They understand that every decision has immediate consequences, and survival results from observation, patience, and continuous adaptation. In their world, there is no forgiveness, only the chance to live one more hour, one more night, and see the amber glow of the campfire in the blizzard, the sacred symbol of survival, knowledge, and perseverance. Mountain people quickly realized that survival was not an art, but an ongoing contract with nature and their own bodies. They wore many layers of clothing not for fashion, but to negotiate with the cold, an unchanging and ruthless partner. Wool shirts, thick vests, heavy fur coats. By the end of winter, they looked like walking furniture. Each layer was a barrier, a protective charm, a reminder that in winter existence was not guaranteed. Laundry was a luxury. Soap and water froze. The concept of cleanliness became meaningless, giving way to a distinctive odor, a mixture of sweat, wood, smoke, animal fat, and bad decisions. Just by seeing them from afar, you knew a mountain person was there, and wolves had long since retreated. Every heavy layer, every damp shoe, every ridiculous hat told a story. Not about style or status, but about survival. A patch on the shoulder, a repaired seam near the knee, the marks of a fall, all were evidence of encounters with winter, danger, and their own mistakes. Their clothing was armor against madness, not only physically, but mentally. When alone for weeks, when echoes were their only companions, those layers reminded them that they still existed, that there was still a chance to live another day. Modern people talk about fashion. Mountain people talk about survival. They did not wear designer coats. They wore anything that hadn't starved them. And when winter receded, those layers were shed like bark, revealing the pale, exhausted human within. Another winter would come. They would don those layers again, step into nature's cruelty, and learn lessons that no book could teach. Survival became a habit, a necessity, and sometimes an addiction. Food was similar. Mountain people ate not for pleasure, but for thermodynamics. Every calorie was a coal keeping the body warm, preserving the chance of survival. A gourmet meal was anything that didn't kill you before you could swallow it. They boiled, roasted, or sometimes ate slower creatures. Beaver tails were delicacies, moose tongues were luxury, the rest was fuel. Bones for broth, hides for shelter, fat for warmth, and scent to repel nearby creatures. Salt was precious as gold. Spices were creations born of desperation and soot. When supplies ran out, they even ate boiled shoe soles, calling it leather soup. Language became meaningless when life was at stake. Kale coffee, whiskey as an accidental but useful stimulant. In the modern world, people talk about healthy diets, calories, and nutritional value. For mountain people, food was a survival tool. It not only kept the body warm, it was a matter of life or death. At the end of the day, if they survived, they gathered around the only luxury, the campfire. Not just warmth, the fire was a witness, a companion, a reminder that they still existed. The flickering amber light in the white snow was a sacred symbol, a miracle in the ongoing struggle against cold and loneliness. Mountain people did not debate the meaning of life. They observed, learned, and adapted. They wondered whether their fingers still worked, whether the fire would survive the next gust, whether today's food would last until tomorrow. Enlightenment for them was not lofty philosophy, but dry socks, a full stomach, and a steady campfire. In that small circle, the rest of the universe had only a faint meaning, enough to continue existing. At night, when snow whistled through the forest, words began to flow. Not abstract philosophy, but shared talk of whiskey, weather, and dangers that could kill if underestimated. Daytime silence became oppressive at night, pressing on the bones to remind that loneliness was reality. The fire became companion and witness. It flared at the right moment, but did not judge, did not forgive, only reminded that survival was a temporary achievement, and nothing was certain. Each mountain person had their own ritual with fire. Some lit it obsessively, as if to prove they still had control over something in this world. Others sat silently, hypnotized, staring at the last warmth, as if trying to absorb every remaining light. Philosophy was not ideas. Philosophy was endurance. They did not argue about life, but faced it minute by minute, hour by hour. They learned to respect cold and fire, two ruthless but honest teachers. Sleep for them was not rest, but a temporary truce with death. They did not go to sleep, only stopped moving, hoping no enemies, hunger, cold, or danger would intrude. Sleeping in a cave, under trees, or buried in snow, they learned to adapt to the harshest conditions. A fur blanket was a precious asset. If they had two, they even shared with the creatures living alongside them. No pillows, no tents, no amenities. Comfort was a luxury, fire an unpredictable companion, sometimes burning too bright or extinguishing too soon. They learned to maintain posture, conserve warmth, and understood that every waking minute was a victory. Every spark was a reminder that warmth was temporary, every meal just a chance to live one more day. In the small circle of flickering firelight and fragile warmth, mountain people understood that survival was not bravery, but awareness, adaptation, and perseverance, skills that modern civilization rarely teaches. On the mountains, existence is not a series of comfortable choices, but a continuous test of adaptability. Mountain people live amid frost and rime, where every step, every breath, every heartbeat is dictated by the ruthless laws of nature. They learn to predict the weather by listening to the wind through the treetops, feeling changes in humidity on their skin, recognizing signs of an approaching storm, and knowing when the snow is thick enough to hinder a step, but still safe enough to pitch camp. Every sense is honed, not for pleasure, but for survival. Their vision is acute to every movement of animals. Their hearing detects the snapping of branches by forest creatures before the eyes can see, and their sense of smell distinguishes between the scent of freshly cooked animal fat and the smell signaling danger. Night on the mountains is not merely darkness, but a living entity, always lurking, pressing into your bones with cold and loneliness. Mountain people sleep not to rest, but to listen and learn to merge with the environment, to practice patience with what they cannot change. A pile of snow, a broken tree, an exhausted horse all become part of a makeshift bed where they lay aside all illusions of comfort. When their eyes close, they do not dream of warmth or ease, but of surviving the next gust of wind, the freezing hours, the sound of hail on a makeshift roof. Dreaming too much is not pleasure, but danger. A moment of distraction can be fatal. Tools are part of survival, but in the mountains, tools are not simply material. They are extensions of the body, integrated with the will to live. Every rifle, every knife, every trap is checked, repaired, patched, sometimes with makeshift materials like bark or leather cord. No shops, no blacksmiths, no replacement goods. Survival depends on creativity and patience. An axe, a knife, or a piece of cord can be the difference between a warm meal and a freezing, hungry night. They know how to make every item, even damaged or worn, useful, and each carries marks of the past, encounters with weather, wild animals, and themselves. But more importantly, their strongest tool does not lie in their hands, it lies in endurance. A mountain person learns to merge with pain, scarcity, and the absurdity of life. Frostbitten fingers, numb feet, cuts from knives or traps all become lessons, not disasters. Modern people fear a dead phone battery. Mountain people fear no fire, no food, no mobility. They do not complain, they observe, learn, and adapt. Endurance is a biological process. At first, newcomers moan, mumble, bundle up, curse the weather, but the body adapts faster than the mind. After a few winters, the skin becomes tougher than the outer fur, nerves numb to pain, and they sleep on ice without shivering. Pain becomes background noise, like wind, snow, or the heartbeat in the chest. Fingers become tools, feet become hooves. They become a semi-domesticated species, learning to survive in ways philosophy or modern knowledge cannot teach. Enlightenment on the mountains does not come from books, but from harsh experience. A seasoned trapper can sit motionless for hours, observing a trap line or the flow of snow despite freezing winds and ice. Patience and stillness become weapons. They learn to walk without wasting energy, breathe so the lungs do not react, sleep without fully relaxing, and eat without wasting calories. Each day is a biological experiment where the body learns and the mind evaluates only afterward. Mountain people do not fear pain. Pain is part of the weather forecast, a signal about the environment, not an enemy. Cuts, frostburn, bruises, swelling, all are proof that they are still alive. Whiskey and denial are classic remedies. No doctor, no bandages, no sympathy. They heal as nature taught, keep moving, learn to adapt, and see pain as a companion. Every aching bone, every purple toe is a badge of honor, a triumph from the curriculum of the mountains. Pain also simplifies life. It removes luxury, distraction, and meaningless philosophical questions. When everything hurts, a person has only one concern: survival. Loneliness is a roommate. Horses, dogs, and rifles are allies. The only heartbeat you hear is your own. And when that heartbeat grows weary, you learn to keep going, to survive in a world where comfort is a luxury and death is always near. Mountain people teach us that patience, endurance, and adaptation are essential qualities. They turn cold, hunger, and loneliness into teachers, pain into a learning tool, and each harsh day into a lesson in willpower. They do not seek greatness or glory, they seek continued existence. And in the flickering circle of fire amid the ice, in the fragile warmth and shimmering light, they find a living philosophy. Patience is strength, endurance is knowledge, and survival is the ultimate victory. In the mountain world, every breath carries weight. The cold air is not just an environmental factor, but a constant test of your endurance. Mountain people learn to feel each layer of air, each small ice flake falling on their hair or fur, knowing that the cold waits for no preparation or mercy. The supply horse is the judge. It does not care who you are, only whether you can lead it through deep snow, across slippery cliffs, through blizzard nights. The dog is not just a companion. It is a therapist, a guard, a hunter, and a fire-sharing partner. The rifle protects both you and them from becoming someone else's dinner. This is not a relationship of choice. It is a survival triangle, both stable and chaotic, where each member depends on the others to survive. Loneliness becomes a harsh teacher. In places where the nearest human is hundreds of miles away, the echo of your own thoughts is enough to create an argument you always lose. Some men collapse under the weight of silence, overwhelmed by the endless vastness of the mountains, but most learn to name everything: traps, shoes, knives, campfires, because in the end, at least something responds. The horse's breathing, the vibration of the reins, the whisper of wind through the branches become conversations, survival signals. Nature is not for the weak. It is ruthless but fair. It only rewards those who pay attention, learn, and react in time. Mountain people measure success differently from the modern world. Not gold, not bank accounts. Success is when the fire burns all night, the horse does not stray, and the dog still wags its tail when you whisper meaningless words. On a freezing night, the only heartbeat you hear is your own, along with the steady breathing of the horse and the faint warmth from the campfire. And every spark you strike is a small miracle, a temporary victory over the cold, over loneliness, over death that is always lurking. Lighting a fire in a blizzard is not a skill, but an art of survival. You fight with frozen wood, frozen hands, and sometimes your own paralyzing despair. There is no option or refusal. You light the fire because death does not wait. Flint and steel become sacred relics. Embers are kept in bark or moss, pressed against the chest across miles of snow. Losing them means a night of regret, even the risk of burning yourself. You scrape bark, blow, curse, and finally, when the first spark flashes, it is not just light. It is a friend returned from the dead, a living miracle amidst absolute cold and solitude. The fire not only keeps you warm, it is the foundation of civilization, safety, and alertness. Every crackle signals success, every hiss signals damp wood, and sometimes it burns your last remaining glove. You learn to read the fire as you would a mood, understanding the meaning of each smoke wisp, each spark. It is a relentless teacher, demanding respect and pure stubbornness. You do not light the fire out of hope. You light it because you have no other choice. Alongside the fire, adaptability is their only weapon. The body has learned to endure cold, hunger, and solitude. Fingers and toes become tools and hooves. The body transforms to survive. They do not fear pain. Pain is only background noise like wind, snow, or a heartbeat. The forest whispers endlessly, and they must learn its language or they will not survive long. Lose the dog, lose the horse, lose the fire, and even sanity can be buried. Mountain people do not complain. They do not need an audience. Patience, resilience, and perseverance become their measure of worth. They learn to read signs of a blizzard through smells, sounds, and movements of nature, while the modern person relies on apps, maps, or weather forecasts. The cold is not an enemy. It is a strict teacher taking attendance daily, with lessons in humility, respect for nature, and survival intelligence. Failure means being buried, but success is surviving another night, keeping the fire, keeping the horse, keeping the dog, and keeping your wits. They call this endurance the third. No complaints, no whining, just continuing. In a world where all comfort is temporary, they remind us that strength does not come from convenience. It comes from adaptability and patience. The weak fire in the cold, the fragile warmth, and the surrounding creatures are proof of existence, of endurance, and of survival intelligence. Today, the wilderness is shrinking, and such mountain people are becoming shadows of history. Some become guides, some open trading posts, and some wander deeper into the mountains and never return. But their lessons remain, buried under the snow, whispered in the wind, reminding us that comfort does not create strength. Hardship, cold, and solitude are the true teachers. These people live, endure, and leave traces in the landscape: bones, footprints, extinguished fires. They turn challenges into knowledge, pain into experience, survival into a class without grades. And in the silence of the frozen world, they leave a simple truth: warmth is temporary, but the cold is eternal. The difference between the two, the fragile fire between life and oblivion, remains the only thing that makes a person realize they are alive. The medieval kitchen was not just a place for cooking. It was a small universe with its own rhythm where chaos and order intertwined so that every movement, every clatter carried the meaning of survival. A massive fire could roast an entire wild boar, boil a cauldron the size of a bathtub, and smoke half the family before breakfast. Yet it was precisely this chaotic smoke and flame that became the heart of the house, the indispensable pulse of medieval life. Every kitchen, whether a peasant hut or a lord's castle, revered fire as a sacred relic, a friend, a survival ally. Nothing was to be taken lightly here, for life and death hung in the air, measured through the color of the smoke, the smell of roasting meat, and the red glow of the hearth. The cooks of that time were both artisans and sorcerers. They stirred pots with one hand, made the sign of the cross with the other, whispering incantations that the pot must turn clockwise, Hattunet, lest demons ruin the meal. Cooking was a combination of chemistry, art, magic, and survival skill. Ingredients were sometimes suspicious: bread kneaded from sawdust and water, meat smoked or salted to avoid worms, and vegetables grown in gardens but sometimes not fresh enough to cook. There were no forks, only hands, knives, and occasionally a spoon to sip soup or stew. A shared bowl was not only a means of eating, but also a symbol of sharing, risk, and adaptability. Yet amidst the hardships, the art of cooking persisted. Spices were treasures. Each peppercorn, pinch of cinnamon, or saffron stigma was a rare prize transported across deserts, mountains, and seas. In a noble kitchen, sprinkling imported pepper onto a stew was like flaunting a Rolex, a symbol of power, wealth, and sophistication. Meanwhile, the small fire in a peasant hut with a flickering iron pot symbolized survival. Every ember was precious. It provided warmth, cooked food, and even established the daily rhythm of life. In both worlds, fire was central. It sustained, protected, and tested humans. For peasants, ingredients came primarily from the land: barley, rye, oats, kale, onions, cabbage. Herbs like sage, parsley, and thyme added flavor to simple stews. Meat was rare and precious, often appearing only at festivals or weddings. Salted herring and natural seasonings were the only familiar flavors in an ordinary meal. For the nobility, however, the kitchen became a stage where luxury was displayed through each dish. Roast swans, stuffed peacocks gilded with gold, and intricate desserts not only served the body but showcased social status and power. Spices were key in both worlds. For the wealthy, saffron, pepper, nutmeg, and sugar were treasures, worth as much as gold. They were transported from Venice, Cairo, and India along dangerous routes, and each pouch of spices testified to wealth, power, and sophistication. For the poor, spices were a dream, but in the noble kitchen, they enriched flavors and masked food imperfections, sometimes the smell of meat not entirely fresh. Medieval spices were not merely flavors, they were political, economic, and spiritual tools, where a pinch of cinnamon could remind everyone of the host's power. Yet the medieval kitchen was not merely display, it was a challenge. Each dish was a test. Fire was never stable, every pot had its own heat, ingredients were sometimes stubborn, and cooking times were never measured by clocks but by instinct. A minor mistake, could have serious consequences. An undercooked chicken could send the entire noble family rushing to the privy, and the cook's reputation was at stake. Children roasting meat spent hours turning it, and master chefs arranged everything like generals before battle. The clatter of pans, rising smoke, dogs sniffing leftovers, the mingling sense of meat, smoke, and sweat all created chaos with order. The medieval kitchen was where science, art, and superstition intersected. Humoral theory guided the use of spices to balance the body: heat for warmth, sweetness for energy, warmth to drive away illness. Above all, cooking was a harmony of health and spirit. A successful dish not only satisfied the palate but nourished the mind, stabilized emotions, and reflected the power of the host. When a dish failed, the consequences were severe, but when successful, it was a masterpiece: roasted quail and almond pies, thick sauces, fig and honey pastries, all born from fire, sweat, and perseverance. The medieval kitchen was a place where chaos was mastered, where humans learned to control nature on a small scale to create something both sustaining and refined. It was a lesson in patience, creativity, and adaptability, qualities modern humans seem to have forgotten. In every spice grain, every roasted piece of meat, and every ember existed a worldview. Life was a combination of order and chaos, creativity and survival. And here, in the smoky hearth, the lessons of power, patience, and the art of survival still resonate, reminding us that no matter how the world changes, fire, food, and refinement are forever tied to power, life, and human instinct. To step into the world of medieval cuisine is to enter a universe where everything is defined by power, belief, and survival. Every meal, whether in a grand castle or a peasant hut, tells its own story. In the castle, the banquet table groans under the weight of lavish dishes: golden roasted beef, intricately decorated almond tarts, deep red wine glasses exuding spicy aromas. Each dish is not merely food, it is a declaration of power, a symbol of status and wealth. A roasted peacock is not just for eating. Its feathers are reattached, gilded with gold, creating a performance that leaves guests in awe. Meanwhile, the servants might only watch from the kitchen doorway and receive leftovers behind the gate, reminding that social boundaries are measured by the distance to the salt cellar, or even by the light and heat of the hearth. In contrast, the peasant's meal is a matter of survival. A pot of barley soup placed in the center of the table, with diced turnips or fried potatoes, sometimes with a piece of smoked meat if lucky, forms the heart of family life. Eating together is not only for satiation, but also a ritual that binds the community, a reminder that despite hardships, they survive together. Every piece of bread, every spoonful of soup is precious. Wasting food is taboo. Superstition permeates every action. Breaking bread incorrectly can bring bad luck. Wasting salt is a sin. Eating without giving thanks opens the way to misfortune. Even in a small hut, the kitchen is a sacred center where humans confront life and death daily. However, it is precisely the limitations and scarcity that foster creativity. Medieval cooks did not merely prepare food, they transformed ingredients into stories, performances, and culinary magic. Sauces are where power is expressed. A common sauce, galantine, made from breadcrumbs, stock, and vinegar, colored with blood or saffron, both balanced flavors and masked tough meat. In more sumptuous feasts, finely ground almond milk served as the foundation for many dishes, from stews to desserts, meeting religious regulations and refined tastes. Honey, the liquid gold of the Middle Ages, was used everywhere, in pastries, wine, even roasted meat, adding sweetness, symbolic value, and contrast to savory dishes. Contrast is not only between sweet and savory, but also between hot and cold, dry and moist, spicy and sour, all blending to create ultimate balance according to the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Cinnamon warms the heart, hot ginger fights the cold, saffron lifts the spirit, and black pepper signifies wealth while masking the smell of meat that is not fresh. Each pinch of spice is a strategic decision for flavor, for health, and for status. While the wealthy display power through exotic spices, the poor use whatever is available from their gardens to balance nutrition and sustain vitality. Religious rituals governed every meal. Lent, 40 days before Easter, forbade meat, milk, and eggs. Advent, Fridays were for fish. These rules both conserved resources and encouraged creativity in the kitchen. Fish became the centerpiece, prepared in dishes that mimicked meat or even shaped like roasted birds. In monasteries, inventive cooks transformed vegetarian meals into refined culinary challenges, from almond milk to fruit sauces, each dish carrying aesthetic and spiritual value. In wealthy households, fasting sometimes also displayed opulence. Sturgeon or porpoise was served as exotic fare, legal under religious law, yet demonstrating power and financial capacity. On feast days, meals became public displays of abundance. Roasted oxen, honey bread, and flowing beer were signs of prosperity and religious joy. Cooking for holy days or weddings was an act of devotion, both responsibility and indulgence. Timing and eating manners followed church orders. Monks ate in silence while scriptures were read, turning meals into meditation. Peasants prayed before meals and left small portions for spirits or the poor, reminding that hunger was ever present. Medieval kitchen tools, though simple, were sophisticated and creative. Iron cauldrons hung suspended over open flames, dishes simmered for hours, and cooks adjusted heat with bundles of wood, skill, and instinct. The hearth became a battlefield. Smoke, ash, and fire vied for dominance, while humans had to control everything to deliver a perfect meal. A small mistake could have serious consequences, but success was absolute art, a combination of creativity, skill, superstition, and mental fortitude. Thus, the medieval kitchen was where inner strength and power converged, where humans confronted nature, society, and their own beliefs. Every dish, every spice, every feast was a message. Food not only nourished the body, but also the spirit, expressed power, and taught lessons about morality and social order. Amid the chaos of smoke, ash, and aromas, the kitchen was an arena where life, creativity, and faith intersected, creating a culinary culture that was simultaneously religious and social, survival oriented, and luxurious. A world where eating was not merely a necessity, but an art, a ritual, and a living magic. In the dim kitchens of Luda, where flames blazed and smoke rose from iron cauldrons dangling over open fires, every utensil carried symbolic weight, sometimes even as dangerous as a weapon of war. Heavy spits were used to roast whole animals, sometimes powered by dogs, while cast iron pans, iron ladles, and sharp knives, so heavy they could protect the cook in the constant quarrels among the tense servants, were omnipresent. While knives were everywhere, forks were almost considered a luxury and condemned by many priests, who saw them as a brazen innovation, a sly devil, replacing the fingers God had given humanity. Even bread bore a ritual mark. Families stamped their loaves with a unique symbol before placing them in the communal oven, to distinguish them in a world where timing, temperature, and cooking skill were everything. Bread baked too early or too late turned to charcoal, and the cook, with sharp eyes and keen sense of smell, had to read the fire like a sailor reads the wind, a practice that was both art and survival. In the kitchen, soot, smoke, and oil fumes were not only physical challenges, they were tests of the spirit. Kitchen dogs, licking plates clean, participated in a rudimentary hygiene cycle. Humans washed their hands in shared water bowls before and after meals. Yet these humble acts shaped the pride and identity of the cook. Every knife, every ladle, every iron cauldron was blessed, intertwined with faith. Crosses were carved into bread before baking, the hearth sprinkled with holy water on feast days, and slaughter knives anointed, all to ensure that the cook's work not only nourished, but also preserved sanctity. Medieval cuisine, often seen by many as crude and dirty, was in fact the foundation of modern gastronomy. The obsession with balancing the humors, with sweet, sour, spicy, and salty flavors, created rudimentary nutritional principles that laid the groundwork for a balanced diet, as noted by physicians like Hildegard of Bingen. Sauces, combinations of meat and fruit, honey replacing sugar, and exotic spices such as pepper, cinnamon, and nutmeg not only created flavor, but shaped economies, trade, and even spurred major voyages like Columbus's journey. Every meal was a message about power, religion, and society. Kings and nobles displayed wealth through exotic meats, peasants innovated with what they had, and monks sought to combine faith with culinary refinement. In the town of Luda, behind the kitchens and meals, society was tightening under superstition and authority. Under the rule of Cardinal Richelieu, Loudun, once a semi-independent state friendly to Protestants, was now forced to adhere to Catholic law. The populace lived in constant tension, praying publicly and fearing watchful eyes. Devils were not just symbols. People believed they lurked in every illness, every failure, every temptation. Women whispered about witches, priests carried crosses more than remedies, and the air was thick with incense, rumors, and paranoia, setting the stage for impending psychological disasters. In this context, the Ursuline convent appeared as a fortress of sanctity and discipline, where noble girls were sent to learn how to avoid scandal and seek virtue. Yet the outward calm concealed inner frenzy. Screams, curses, and writhing behaviors inside the convent became terrifying stories spread throughout the town. Even longtime residents of Ludun were unprepared for this chaos, where the nuns seemed controlled by an invisible force, screams echoing in the night, spreading like an omen everyone knew but no one dared confront. At the center of the scandal was Father Urbain Grandier, a famous priest, intelligent and personally powerful. He was not only handsome, eloquent, and charismatic, but also challenged the church, mocked town authority, and skillfully protected Ludun's remaining independence. His allure made both noble women and commoners linger longer in confession, spreading rumors about children and romantic affairs. The combination of intellect and charm made Grandier the perfect target for enemies patiently waiting for a mistake to bring him down. The scandal truly began when the Ursuline nuns arrived in town. The new convent required a spiritual advisor, and Grandier, the most famous priest, was the obvious choice. But when he refused, Mother Superior Sister Jean Des, a devout but imaginatively inclined woman, felt offended. This refusal ignited a chain of horrifying events. The nuns began exhibiting bizarre behavior, reports of harassment, demonic activity, and obsessive rituals spread throughout Ludun. Religious faith, fear, and the power of each individual transformed Ludun into a horrific stage, where stories of cuisine, morality, and authority converged, creating a vivid portrait of medieval society, chaotic, superstitious, yet also creative and complex. In this world, kitchens, small towns, convents, and even personal decisions all reflected the same message. In the Middle Ages, life was not merely survival, but a delicate balance between power, faith, and imagination. Every action, from baking bread to arranging dishes, from praying before meals to critiquing church authority, carried deep social meaning, reminding us that culture, cuisine, and politics were closely intertwined, forming a legacy whose influence still resonates today. After the dramatic accusations of Sister Jean Des, Loudun was no longer an ordinary town. The convent, once a place of quiet prayer, had become a stage for the devil, where every scream, every convulsion, and every curse formed the rhythm of collective hysteria. Each night, the nuns swayed, twisted, or hovered in the air, while Sister Jeanne always occupied the central position with the most intense displays, claiming to be the bride of Christ, yet simultaneously a victim of Grandier's magic. These scenes spread rapidly throughout the town, turning Loudun into the focal point of the region, where pilgrims, distant priests, and the curious gathered to witness the holy and demonic phenomena unfolding before their eyes. The story of Grandier, once a respected priest, was now transformed into a dark legend. Every confession, whether fabricated or real, was carefully recorded by local clergy, as if these pages could prove their divine authority and Grandier's guilt. The nuns sequentially displayed bizarre gestures, contorting into strange shapes, spitting holy water, screaming in Latin they had never learned. These convulsions and curses, though full of tragedy, left observers, from nobles to soldiers, both astonished and simultaneously frightened and intrigued. Ludun, already rife with rumors and paranoia, now became a circus of sanctity, where superstition and power intertwined so tightly they were inseparable. Exorcism rituals, initially private acts of the clergy, quickly became public events. The clanging of chains, the rapid chanting, and the nuns' screams echoed through the halls, pushing the hysteria to its peak. Exorcists competed to display authority, shouting commands at invisible spirits, interrogating the nuns as in a courtroom drama, all considered irrefutable evidence of demonic possession. Each time Sister Jean de convulsed, her voice grew louder, as if she knew she was being watched, and used her performance to influence, simultaneously captivating the crowd and reinforcing the church's power. In this context, Grandier became the perfect victim of chaos. The accusations were strangely linked. The nuns described his face and voice in darkness, witnessing demons in various forms, from black cats and snakes to ghosts hovering on the ceiling. These testimonies, though irrational, were accepted as evidence by the church. Even forged documents written in blood and signed by Lucifer, Leviathan, or Belub became official proof demonstrating the demonic pact Grandier had supposedly signed. From this point, Loudun became a political theater where religion and political power intertwined. Richelieu and his agents saw an opportunity to punish a dissenter and consolidate royal authority, turning the affair into a tool for social control. It seemed that Loudun and the convent were a symphony of superstition, power, and spectacle. The scenes of screaming, fainting, and hovering nuns observed by the public became a form of public horror entertainment. Each exorcism was not only a ritual, but also a way for the town to verify the church's authority, a living demonstration of how belief could manipulate human behavior. Clergy and physicians tried to analyze the phenomena, looking for signs of hysteria or mental illness, but religious faith and social pressure overrode all scientific reasoning. The truth, in the eyes of the public, entirely depended on the church's authority and the fear deeply embedded in the community's psyche. Despite immense pressure, Grandier maintained his composure. He insisted on his innocence, claiming to be the victim of slander fabricated by jealousy, political power, and superstitious rumor. Yet in Loudun, truth no longer mattered. Every scream of the nuns, every groan, every spectral image was considered evidence against him. When he was arrested in 1634, Loudun had become a vast stage of punishment, where authorities, the church, and the populace participated in a collective performance in which logic and justice had no place. The days of the trial became an extended tragedy. The nuns continued to scream, convulse, and perform increasingly intense scenes whenever spectators were present. The priests, under the guidance of renowned exorcists, simultaneously conducted rituals and observed the public's reaction, reinforcing their power and prestige. Crowds arrived from far and wide, including curious pilgrims to witness the possessed nuns, their screams forming the soundtrack of a vivid horror performance, making Loudun a symbol of the intersection of faith, superstition, and politics. While Grandier awaited sentencing, the story of Loudun continued to resonate, not merely a religious or political event, but a testament to the power of belief, the dramatic tendencies of humans, and the workings of society under superstition and authority. The affair demonstrated that, in the medieval world, reason and justice often lagged behind whispers, spectacles, and the overwhelming force of the community, where a priest, a nun, and a small town could become living symbols of an entire era. After the fire that burned Father Urban Grandier died down, Loudun did not return to the peace everyone had expected. The town, once bustling with the grandeur of the event, was now left with a heavy silence, a haunting emptiness. The convent walls, which had once echoed with screams and chants, were now soaked with the smell of smoke and memories of pain. The nuns, although officially exorcised, continued to convulse, scream, or tremble as if the spirits they had once named had never truly left. These convulsions were no longer a means to accuse a priest, but remnants of collective hysteria, evidence that the power of belief and fear was not easily extinguished. Loudun now resembled an empty stage, where the characters were dead, but the story survived in every gesture, gaze, and whisper of the remaining inhabitants. Sister Jeanne d'Ay, who had stood at the center of the storm, became a living symbol of the scandal. Her reputation was built not only on accusing Grandier or enduring demonic possession, but also on her ability to turn suffering into a compelling performance. She traveled throughout France, recounting her story before the public, the court, and the nobility. Each appearance emphasized her torment, resilience, and divine victory. Her eyes widened in feigned fear, her whispering voice trembled yet remained decisive, and the details of the monstrous visions she claimed to have seen, the tempting whispers of Satan, or the nuns hovering in midair, were all exaggerated, embellished, and adjusted to maximize drama. These performances captivated the audience and further enhanced her authority before the church, making Jean an undeniable symbol of divine triumph. However, beneath her pious mask, Jean was not entirely at ease. In private nights, she often dreamed of Grandier, not as the devil she had described in her confessions, but as a gaunt, broken man, silent and accusatory. The image haunted her, his face, eyes staring directly at her, both accusing and challenging. Jean would awaken trembling, caught between a sense of victory and guilt, questioning whether her actions had truly brought salvation or were merely a political spectacle orchestrated by the church and the court. This conflict made Jean a complex figure, both a victor and a victim of belief, both performer and haunted individual. Scholars and writers from Paris to distant regions began discussing Loudoun. Some expressed skepticism. Were the nuns truly possessed, or were these manifestations merely psychological effects of isolation, fear, and collective suggestion? These interpretations, progressive for the time, planted a new thought that the power of belief and authority could manipulate perception, turn fear into evidence, and transform performance into reality. Loudun, once seen as a divine triumph, now stood as proof of how political power and religious belief could intertwine, leaving justice and reason outside the door. Across France, the story of Grandier and Loudun became emblematic, not only of religion, but also of politics, power, and social control. Richelieu and his agents achieved their goals, removing a dissident priest, consolidating church authority, and sending a message that no one could stand outside power without punishment. Yet this event also planted a deeper obsession: fear of the power of belief and the ability to turn any action into sin. Loudun was no longer an ordinary town. It became a symbol of superstition and collective hysteria, where history and legend mingled so closely that distinguishing truth from fiction was nearly impossible. In the following years, Sister Jean d'Es' fame continued to spread. She was summoned to the court, attended ceremonies, and received praise from bishops and nobility. Each appearance, she recounted the story of demons, convulsions, and ultimate triumph through faith, turning herself into living proof of divine power. Yet, in her private mind, she remained haunted by dreams of Grandier. This obsession was not about power or fame, but about guilt and human contradiction, how to distinguish between salvation and manipulation, between truth and performance, between the power of faith and the power of fear. Loudun, after Grandier's burning, became empty, yet remained deeply haunted. Pilgrims no longer visited, trade declined, and the town's name became a symbol of madness. Grandier's ashes, once seen as proof of divine victory, now seemed to poison the land of faith, reminding everyone that power and belief could self-destruct. For centuries after, Loudun was mentioned in stories of faith, fear, and manipulation. The question remained: who was truly possessed? The nuns, or all those who believed in them? And could religious power, when combined with fear, create such a vivid spectacle that an entire society bowed before it? The Loudun affair became a lasting lesson. Faith and fear, when combined, could manipulate psychology, society, and politics. Later historians, psychologists, and writers viewed it as a classic case of collective hysteria, where truth no longer mattered, and fear and authority dictated human behavior. Loudun was not merely an exorcism. It was a symbol of how belief, power, and performance could create history, and how real demons existed in the human imagination, longer than any fire could burn. The narrow alleys and cobblestones of Paris seemed never to be silent. By day, the city echoed with prayers and the footsteps of monks, while by night those very streets became the stage for an underworld few knew. Medieval Paris existed as a dual entity: above, faith, authority, and religious order; below, desire, sin, and intricate plots, all interwoven to create a rhythm of life almost unbelievable in its complexity. The brothels hidden within the city were not merely places to satisfy forbidden desires. They were power bases where information, secrets, and survival were exchanged according to unspoken rules. Every flickering candle, every carefully drawn curtain, or even an accidentally uncut loaf of bread became a signal, an invisible map, guiding those who could read through the labyrinth of desire and power. The women who worked in these brothels, though condemned by society, were queens in their own realms. In the dim light and behind closed walls, they ruled small domains acknowledged by priests, knights, and merchants alike in their own ways. Not everyone chose this path, but for many it was an act of survival. A roof over their heads, a meal, and a sense of control over part of their lives, while poverty and war threatened their existence outside. Some became maidoms, managing business with remarkable acuity and caution, keeping records, negotiating with officials, and even accumulating wealth surpassing that of the most prominent legitimate merchants. Legal tricks, false names, male intermediaries, or the church's deliberate overlooking became tools allowing them to survive and thrive in a society that maximally restricted women's power. Young women entering the profession did so not only to survive, but also to learn the art of survival in a city where purity and sin always coexisted. Some saved enough to leave, seeking marriage or opening taverns. Others succumbed to exhaustion, illness, or became victims of violence. They were ghosts by day, queens by night, existing in the irresolvable contradictions of society. Each personal story testified to extraordinary skill, survival instinct, and adaptability, yet also bore traces of suffering, manipulation, and isolation. Not only survivors, prostitutes, and madams were also holders of informational power. Knights, merchants, priests, and officials, those who could destroy reputations, had to exercise caution when interacting with them. Secrets whispered in the dark, unofficial revelations, and small maneuvers to control information became instruments of power in the hands of those whom society wished to erase. Their ability to manipulate information made them more formidable than overt authority. They knew everything others wished to hide, and in silence, they could alter the fate of anyone. Meanwhile, the church continued its work, condemning sin and restraining desire in daytime sermons, while quietly tolerating or overlooking condemned acts at night. This was not accidental contradiction, but a finely tuned system. Moral order depended on latent sin, and forbidden acts acted as a pressure valve to maintain social stability. The church displayed its power, but simultaneously acknowledged that humans, though taught and penitent, always harbored desires that could never be entirely controlled. Paris was a parallel world. The heights of piety and the depths of desire coexisted. Here, life and death, purity and sin, power and survival were interwoven. Brothels became observatories of society. Outsiders saw debauchery, but those who understood knew these were bases of hidden power, where survival, information, and strategy dictated behavior. In the flickering candlelight, where cloaks brushed together, Paris reflected both worship and temptation, both faith and desire, both power and survival. These women, though labeled sinners by society, held central roles in the city's intricate network. They did not merely exist, but operated sophisticated systems, manipulated information, and influenced the behavior of those with outward authority. They knew that a well-timed whisper could change fate. A glance, a gesture, or a revealed secret could shift power within the city. Paris thus became a map of desire and power, where hidden currents were the city's second heartbeat, lying beneath piety and official authority. And so, Ludun and Paris, despite their geographical distance, told the same story. The power of belief, fear, and human desire could never be fully controlled. Ludun was a storm of faith and fear, where a small town became a political and religious stage, while Paris was a vast network of survival traps, power, and desire, where faith and sin not only coexisted but exchanged influence in subtle ways. Both demonstrated that when humans are bound between faith, fear, and the need to survive, the outcome is not always salvation. Sometimes it is clever, skillful, and cunning survival, but no less ruthless. These examples, from Grandier's burning to medieval Parisian women, from Jeanne d'Arc to madams, reflected the same truth. Power, belief, desire, and survival, when intertwined, create a long-lasting frenzy transcending time and space. These stories remind us that devotion, fear, and the need for control, once sanctified or socially accepted, can become unstoppable, stronger than any fire that ever burned in French squares, and more complex than any theological sermon ever echoed in convents. Under the dim light of flickering candles, the brothels of Paris came alive to their own rhythm, where every detail, from the knocking on the door to the scent of the candles, carried its own meaning. Every client, whether knight or merchant, entered a world where time seemed to stand still, a place where desire and survival intertwined in every gesture and glance. The women who worked there did not merely serve pleasure. They were keen observers, wielding power that the virtuous society could scarcely imagine. They understood men better than men understood themselves, perceiving hidden needs and subtle quests for power. This understanding placed them at the center of the city's underground power. They manipulated information, held secrets that, if revealed, could destroy families or a noble's reputation, while protecting themselves in a society rife with danger and prejudice. Parisian nights, when mist rolled over the rooftops and streets fell silent, became a time when social classes met in a parallel space, where names, titles, and status were temporarily erased. Knights returning from the battlefield, valiant by day but timid and curious by night, sought private rooms to indulge desires restrained before the public. Wealth-laden merchants who counted every coin by day sought pleasure and security in spaces where they could be the men they wanted to be, unbound by morality or law. Even priests and monks publicly committed to chastity sometimes slipped into brothels, anonymous beneath cloaks or hoods, acknowledging needs condemned by their own church. They prayed, whispered, paid, and departed, all in a strange harmony between sin and control. The women of the brothels were the center of this ecosystem. They were outcasts, yet indispensable. They wielded power without thrones or royal garments. Understanding psychology, influencing behavior, and controlling information were their weapons. Relationships were built on trust, sometimes threat, sometimes allure. All served a single purpose: survival. While the Parisian church condemned them from the pulpit, the authorities and tax collectors maintained their existence, making sin an essential part of economic and social life. This created a subtle paradox. The more they were cursed, the more powerful they became. The more society despised them, the more they became the city's secret pillars. Madams not only managed the women, but also oversaw a sophisticated network of information and social relations. They knew who was a reliable client, who was dangerous, who needed satisfaction, and who needed coaxing or intimidation. They maintained order in a risky environment, protected employees from violence, controlled disease, and sometimes acted as political intermediaries. A successful brothel was a place where power, information, and survival intersected, where a wink, a clever word, or a discreet threat could change a person's fate. The private upstairs rooms, meticulously arranged with soft linens, fresh flowers, and incense, were stages for subtle power plays. Mirrors, a rare luxury in the medieval period, created illusions of opulence to attract the nobility. Music, laughter, and footsteps combined into a delicate symphony, blending pleasure and penitence, where everyone played their own character in a perfectly staged drama. There was no random chaos. Everything followed a rhythm, from the serving girls, the madams, the musicians, to the clients. Everyone knew their position and role, and this coordination created a strange order between sin and control. These arrangements, exchanges, and power relations were not mere entertainment. They were means of survival and control. Madams accumulated wealth, sometimes surpassing the merchants or nobles they served, through creative means such as using false names, male intermediaries, or exploiting legal loopholes in the church and government. Some young women could escape the profession by saving enough money, while others fell to illness, exhaustion, or violence, their names surviving only in tax rolls and parish records. The relationship between the church and brothels illustrated the characteristic moral contradictions of medieval Paris. The church condemned, the pope threatened, but city officials collected taxes, bishops monitored health, and maintained order. Even confession became part of this power game. A priest might hear sins on Sunday, then discreetly receive payment on Monday from the very establishment that facilitated those sins. Salvation, in this sense, was sometimes sold for coins rather than earned through genuine penance. The church condemned desire, yet its records depended on it, and no one dared call this blasphemy, for everyone benefited from this dual system. Medieval Paris, therefore, became a parallel city where faith, sin, desire, and underground power coexisted. Brothels were where power and survival met, where women scorned by society became secret pillars of the city, and where sin, though condemned, served as the city's second heartbeat. In the dim candlelight and in spaces bounded by walls, the girls, madams, and clients were all actors in a drama of power and survival, blending pleasure and morality, sin and control. Everything was balanced, every act had a price, and Paris existed as a strange symphony of desire, power, and survival, where sanctity and sin not only coexisted but complemented each other in ways almost impossible to believe. Medieval Paris was not only a city of cathedrals and candlelit squares, but also a sophisticated network of desire and underground power, where brothels were not merely places of entertainment but centers of parallel politics, economy, and society. Every street, every alley bore the marks of hidden tendencies, shaped by the survival needs of women and the discreet greed of men. These discreet houses, often located right next to churches or convents, existed as a living paradox. The more they were cursed, the more they were protected and maintained. The more society despised them, the more powerful they became. This was an ecosystem that Paris had finally constructed, where sin was not eliminated but managed, controlled, and exploited. The women in Parisian brothels were not merely objects of pleasure. They controlled the flow of information, coordinated power, and maintained order in a dangerous environment. They knew how to select clients, assess credibility, and maintain absolute discretion, turning survival into an art. Every wink, every clever lie, every gesture was calculated to protect themselves while generating influence. When a brave knight entered a room by day, or a solemn priest bowed his head in confession, they became pieces on the sophisticated chessboard these women controlled. Their power was not publicly acknowledged, yet no one could deny its hidden influence over Parisian life. City authorities, although officially condemning prostitution, collected taxes and meticulously monitored the operation of brothels. They checked security, required fees, supervised health, and sometimes addressed acts of violence, not out of compassion, but for economic benefit. Even moral purges, such as during Lent or major festivals, were largely symbolic. Closing a brothel usually lasted only a few weeks before officials quietly allowed reopening, collected recovery fees, and continued the flow of profit. This created a paradox. Sin was officially condemned, yet became a pillar of the city's treasury. A poor prostitute might face harsh punishment and public humiliation, while a wealthy client might only pay a fine or confess privately. This inequality reflected Paris's power structure. Gold determined forgiveness, while morality was secondary. Brothels were placed in strategic locations. The left bank near the Sorbonne attracted students and young clergy. The riverbanks near Pontoon, Pont Saint-Michel served merchants, ferrymen, and sailors. Deerier Street near Ilzal Market was a lively center where laughter, songs, and dice games echoed through the night. This system created a map of desire parallel to the sacred map. Each nearby church had a tavern or brothel serving the needs of residents and visitors, a strange balance between prohibition and satisfaction. Madams understood that their survival depended not only on money, but also on managing deception, maintaining secrecy, and coordinating relations with the church and authorities. These relationships reached a high degree of sophistication. Clergy could confess on Sunday, then quietly return to a brothel they once condemned to learn or experience, justifying it through theological theory. They argued that by witnessing temptation and desire, they could better understand and forgive their flock, or that sinning with a fallen woman was less sinful than defiling a virgin. This reasoning was both horrifying and effective, illustrating the hypocrisy of Paris's system. The church condemned, yet simultaneously maintained and exploited this network to control society. The mutually beneficial relationship between the church, authorities, and brothels demonstrated the balance between hypocrisy and survival. Brothels were also spaces of survival, not only economically, but for health and spirit. The women worked long hours, facing disease and violence, yet also found community, friendship, and fleeting moments of joy. Meals, fine wine, subtle music, and rituals serving clients transformed brothels into a wholly different world, where sin was arranged, pleasure had rhythm, and power was distributed according to hidden rules. This was the survival of women in a society that rejected them, yet they became pillars of economic and social balance. However, by the late 14th and 15th centuries, this flow was disrupted by the Black Death, war, and waves of religious reform. Where brothels had once been tolerated as a necessary evil, they now became symbols of divine punishment. The plague was blamed on moral decay, and women in the profession were seen as walking vectors of disease. Raids, arrests, and public punishments made the profession more dangerous than ever. Yet, sin did not disappear. It merely shifted to more discreet locations, private rooms, or continued among the wealthy in private homes. The poor still suffered harshly, where the choice to survive was a thin line between secrecy and violence. Still, the memory of Parisian brothels never truly vanished. They lived on in literature, slang, and the city's structure, reminding that medieval Paris was a city of two faces, where sin and sanctity, desire and power coexisted in parallel, conflicting yet complementing each other. A city built with cathedrals to save souls, yet also rooms to tempt. And from this contradiction, Paris found its true identity: sacred, sinful, and eternal.